talking about Italian identity with all of you students, identity, which is a quite difficult term in our days, politically loaded, and so difficult. And difficult for us, I mean, Italians, even more so, because as you will see during the lecture, we are really anarchic, and we like to talk about ourselves, not so much as Italians, but as Romans, as people from Florence, as people from Venice. And I should even say that when you're meeting somebody from Rome and you ask, oh, where do you come from? They will tell you, I am from Monteverde, Roma. So it's like really we are this kind of, we recognize that we are the citizen of our city, best of our neighborhood district. And
this is in between two Johnson, or two different Johns, or yeah, but
we need
I don't know
somebody
what the
to
hell
mute.
that would be.
I'm sorry, because yes,
There we
I
go.
thought that you were talking to me. So I stopped talking. Okay. Anyway, I understand that you didn't talk to me. So it's very difficult to talk about identity. And anyway, I will try to do it. And to respect the time, I wrote some notes. So I will try to follow my notes. And I will need also to shut down my camera, because otherwise my connection will be very difficult. So let me share my screen. I'm closing my, actually, how do I, let me, here it is. And this. Okay. Do you see it?
See.
Okay, perfect. So I'm starting. So the issues of identity. Here are some maps, and I would like you, while I talk, to focus on the maps, the lower ones. The big one represents Italy, I mean, the geographical condition of Italy. And Italy should be one of the countries that easily should have its own identity. You can see it from a geographic point of view. It's in a peninsula, completely isolated from the rest of the Europe, from the Alps mountains, which are quite high mountains. But if you look down to the various maps, you can see that this identity is really a problematic issue. Okay, I'll start with my notes. For many centuries, Italy was a country only in the collective imagination, and it became a geopolitical reality only in 1860, when King Vittorio Emanuele II of Savoy and Giuseppe Garibaldi, one from the north against the Austrian forces and the other from the south against the Bourbons, were able to unify the majority of the peninsula. At their passage, one by one, the population of the peninsular state declared their adherence to the guiding Savoy monarchy of Piedmont, which was the only Italian indigenous royal line. Until that moment, the south of Italy was always been occupied, first by the French and then from the Spanish, while the north of Italy was occupied by the Austrians, Germans and Austrians. So it's only the Savoy family was over here in this side, northwest of Italy. And so in 1860, we have the first unification. But it's only in 1870 that Rome and the Papal State was definitely conquered. And only at the end of the World War I, the northeastern territories, which were controlled by the Austrians, were unified. So we can really talk about Italy as a complete country starting from 1918. But nevertheless, we consider that date, 1870, the beginning of the unification of Italy. However, the country, as you can see already from this, the representation in these maps, it was really fragmented, has been extremely fragmented. And if you look at this last one, you can see the dialect and languages that we are still talking in our days. So in 1870, it completely lacked a national spirit. The theme of identity runs throughout the 19th and the 20th century, and it's very common to all the European countries on that period. But the history of Italy was the history of a divided country, of an agglomeration of fiefdoms until the middle of the 19th century. Indeed, it could be said that the identity of Italy was truly represented by the sum of idioms, history, and context. The architectural translation of this complex condition generated an hybrid mixture of eclecticism. The problem of identity in that period of time was also tied up with the issue of industrial revolution, which poses a new series of themes and problems. For instance, the mechanization that disrupts the world of craft, the collapse of vernacular tradition, the urban growth with its social transformation, the appearances of masses with no clear social identity, no peasants, no workers, no handicraft, and so on. And these new issues require answers that were common to all countries. Certainly, Italy faced an inherent difficulty in balancing the demand of tradition and national identity with the demands of modernity, which meant sharing forms and symbols of modern life with the other cultures. We can witness, in fact, a constant oscillation in the architectural debate between the two terms of the question: nationalism, internationalism, tradition and modernity, classical Latin culture and modern machine civilization. So how to create an identity looking at tradition and resolving the issues posed by the industrialization? This is what architecture, the discipline, was facing in 1870. In this oscillation between national and international, and I mean, when I say international, I mean modern, every city council tried to realize its contribution to the Italian identity. Many restored their ancient architecture or finished to build elements of it, using a language that was considered appropriate to recall the spirit of the medieval or of the Renaissance communes, city-states. And in fact, if you are looking at these two buildings, the facade of Florence and this building here in Padua, it is very difficult not to recognize what is new and what is old inside the context. The intention was to forge a style that would evoke historical memories. Architecture was considered a didactic instrument that will facilitate the creation of a collective consciousness about the values and the histories of the country. But as you can see in this two projects, the architects and the critics believe that you can pick whatever styles. I mean, Italy has many years of history, many centuries of history. So each city somehow select a style. So we can build in a Gothic style, we can build in a classical style, we can build in a Romanesque style, and all of that will correspond to an identity of the country. And this is already a little bit problematic, no? Because it's not unifying the country. Together with that, we have the other issues of attention towards modernity, which is not simply to resolve. It brought with it the basic problem of the divorce between the modern construction technology, that you can see it here, and its covering forms, usually selected from different historical ages. So the new Italian contemporary style could come out only from an honest relationship between the structure, the materials, and decoration aesthetics. Practically, the new Italian style will be generated as a synthesis between utilities and beauty. And this echoes the words of Vitruvius in his treatise already written in the 1st century before Christ. This is the case in particular of the Galleria di Milano and many other structures that use iron, many other buildings that were using iron structure, which were used boldly, used in the interior spaces, but then completely masked on the outside. And we can see it over here. The outside were using a kind of classical language. This building in particular was very also interesting because not only was trying to, again, create an identity, Italian identity in reference of a modern language and not simply looking back at the past, but it was also producing a new typology, a new kind of buildings. Indeed, this is a commercial gallery, which was perfect for the milieu, the social environment of that period of time, with masses of people that were starting to being urbanized. So it becomes the place for social activities. The gallery is, before being a new topology, is really an urban infrastructure. And if you are looking at the urban fabric here and then the transformation done over here, you can notice that the building was really primarily built to connect Piazza della Scala and the Theater of La Scala with the Duomo of the city through this passage. Therefore, the building is a piece of the city. It's not an architecture, an individual architecture, but it's a piece of the city. And it is designed within a much wider urban transformation project. I will say that probably if we have to talk about identity, this overlapping between architecture and urban landscape is really, really peculiar of Italian architecture. Even in the 1970s, Aldo Rossi, one of our theoreticians, was writing books in which he was talking the architecture of the city to talk about architecture, a single building. So there is this very, very strong connection. If Milano is a way of talking about identity and modernity using a technological international system, modernity in this case is articulated instead without embracing the iron technology. And indeed, in this project by Antonelli, which was originally a synagogue, should have been a synagogue to celebrate the Jewish emancipation in 1848. With Jews emancipation means that that time they ended the ghetto and the legal confinement, so they were not forced to be locked in at night anymore. Antonelli tries to build something that will go back to the building, the actual native building tradition. He developed a masonry skeletal system. The pillars provided the principal point of support, and the arches work as a counterpart of them, like in the medieval structure. The dome was constructed with a predominantly brick skeletal frame with masonry ribs, with arches and vaults reinforced with a framework on iron rods. He referred to Gothic architecture, elastic masonry, a tradition which belonged not only to the North European countries, but also to Italy. Nevertheless, it was considered extremely modern, also in this case, and unfamiliar to be freely exposed. So also if was using something that belonged to our tradition, the structure belonged to our tradition, they felt the necessity to completely hide the interior space and to hide it with a mask, behind a mask that has its own independent decorative classical apparatus, like Milano's gallery. Just to say again, history is fine. We can look at history, but and also when we look at new iron or new technological system, we have to look and cover it up with history, because that's really the point of our identity. In 1878, the sudden death of Vittorio Emanuele II gave to Italy the official possibility to create an architecture that could and must represent the identity of the country. So the monument that we see here in the upper pictures is super colossal in scale. It's built on the side of the Capitoline Hill, which was the symbolic center of Rome. It's the place where emperors and popes chose and established their own political power. So it's really the center of the political power of Rome since the foundation of Rome. The articulation of the white marble, its decoration with explicit symbol, created an architectural language which is quite confused at the end. Certainly rely on classical orders, but more inclined towards the pastiche of eclecticism than to the rigor of classical architecture. This kind of eclecticism became the official style of the young country. And we see it produced in all the institutional buildings of the time. And we see it also down below in the Palazzo di Giustizia, always in Rome, which is the seat of the Italian Supreme Court. A kind of neo-Renaissance building with rusticated base, very strong chiaroscuro. So we can say that until the beginning of the 20th century, the architects were playing with different architectural style, were playing with a structural system that could connect to the modernization of Europe, but they were really randomly choosing one or the other with this building, and from this building on, that one or the other will become both in one single eclectical solution. In reality, it's only, these are all tentative, it's a moving back and forth towards various possibilities. And it is only during the second decade of the 20th century, under fascism, that architects believed in the necessity of adopting a contemporary architectural language to address the question of national identity. However, fascism, which was a totalitarian regime, did not have a unequivocal position towards many things. As many populist regime, it was able to embrace contradictory social demands and economic contradictory solutions to respond to immediate consensus. Architects were requested to develop a true fascist style, and by fascist we mean Italian, but the regime was partly revolutionary, partly traditionalist, and therefore we saw a plethora of architectural design articulation, all truly Italian and fascist. And then again, where is this identity? How can it be declined or showed? Again, through many, many different possibilities. But nevertheless, and I want to talk about these people, attention was given to the suggestions and themes developed by a group of young architects called Gruppo 7. They identified the major issues that characterized the discussion in Italy until World War II, which was the discussion that happened through modernism also in the other countries. So issues of functionalism, rationalized typology, contemporary aesthetics, all really very visible in all these projects, but also respect for tradition and the role of individual architecture. The relationship with history was extremely clear compared with other architects of the modernist movement, European artists and architects of the modernist movement. The new architecture for them should being in contact, being in relation with the past. They look at tradition as an antidote. They conceive it not as a repository of form, like the example that we saw before, but as a proof that the spirit of an age was generated by the forces of history. They believe that respect of tradition and commitment to modernity was not an inconsistent position. They wrote, and I quote, "There is no incompatibility between our past and our present. We do not want to break with tradition. It is tradition that transforms itself and assumes new aspects, though few may recognize it." And in this sense, I want to point the attention to this building on the right by Ridolfi, a tower for restaurants, which can be really simply said that's a Baroque architecture, built 4th century after Baroque architecture. Indeed, it looks very much similar to one of the tortoise columns of the baldachin of St. Peter baldachin built by Bernini. This group of rationalists, the Gruppo 8, which are also called rationalist architects, they identify themselves with Italian fascism, and they hope that Mussolini will give them the possibility of serving the revolution, of building the real Italian fascist architecture. Unfortunately, their expectations were deluded very soon, because again, the regime architecture turned back to neoclassical repertoire. Nevertheless, undoubtedly, some of the most interesting Italian architecture of the 20th century were built by them under the fascist regime. And now I will show you 3 projects by Terragni, which is probably one of the best architects Italian architect for sure, but one of the few best architects of the European scene in the 20th century, in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century. He had Terragni was really involved with fascism. He considered himself to be a real fascist, and he was involved. He had the possibility to design a series of buildings that were celebrating the fascism and were asked to represent the Italianità of architecture. In each city, there was an headquarters for the fascist party, which was called Casa del Fascio. And Terragni, which is from Como, built the Casa del Fascio on his own city. The city was founded in Roman time. The grid Roman urban planning still dominates the old city and is still present in contemporary Como. And it became a point of departure for Terragni's scheme. Here we see already, I mean, from the volume and the facade, that the grid system is really something that he used to organize not only the facade, but the entire volume. Clearly, it is a contemporary modern building. Its language is the language of the modern movement. But it's a building that has a very strong symbolic statement about fascism. The Casa del Fascio is metaphorically a house of glass, and you can see it how transparent it is this facade that we're looking at. Its construction is transparent as the regime is towards its population. As a house of glass, it helps to realize an idealized relationship between fascist leader and Italians. There are no barriers, no obstacle between them. It is anti-bureaucratic and makes them closer to the leaders. And making this connection between the people and the leaders, it creates one single solid community. Obviously, this is all fake. I mean, this is the intention. We know what fascism was, and we know that there was no solid community and there was no transparencies. The building was immediately used for propaganda. And it's very interesting to see, I mean, these are images, collages of the time. And you can see how Mussolini was using it to create his own image, to create the images of the fascism, to invent the fact that thousands of people will come to hear his own discourses. Unfortunately, I said invent, but probably it's the wrong word, because thousands of people really actually went to his own discourses and propaganda. So, but just to say, I wanted just simply to say that the other themes of fascism is not only architecture as a representation of the Italian identity, but architecture used as a propaganda means of propaganda. The site plan. This palazzo is quite classical in a certain sense. And you can see, looking at the plans and looking at the Palazzo Farnese, which is this one over here, which is a Renaissance palazzo in Rome, you can see that Terragni got his own inspiration by the palazzo type and the courtyard. It's present at the very center of the building. Then if we start to decompose somehow the plans, and with the plans, the elevation, we can see that there is a very strong articulation of the grid. It's a modular system. It's a rational mathematical system based on proportion. Like if you had other classes before, I don't know, probably you heard of Renaissance architecture. That was all based in rational mathematical system. There is an extensive use of glass from all sides. And the location of the federal Direttorio Federale, which is the provincial directorate, I think we say it, is located in this point over here. And this one was completely transparent. The location is in the central position in the building, and it's bounded of glass on two sides, so that whatever happened there between the leader of the party of the city of Como and the people would have been visible and visible to everybody, no hiding, no nothing, right? The total transparency, total connection. The entrance of the building is articulated by a huge facade, which has lots of loggias in the upper floors, and on the ground floor has this set, and we see it over here, this set of, this continuous wall, glass wall, with a set of automatic doors, which could all open simultaneously. We see it over here, right? And again, also that it's another way of talking of the proximity between the fascism and the people. The proximity, obviously, the blurring between outside and interior. So there is the possibility of integrating the city and the interior space of the building. The diagrams that you see here and also in the next slide are taken by a book by Peter Asman that is in love with Terragni, and he has been studying him all his life, I would say. And in these diagrams, you see already from this one over here that the facade are being super articulated. So we can really not really talking about a facade as one single layer, the last layer, but the facade, it's a packet. It's almost an inhabited wall. It's something that has a very strong thickness, which is what, when we talk about Roman classical architecture, when we talk about, again, Baroque architecture, we see that, this kind of solid thickness and sculpting out, possibility of sculpting out of the facade. The facade are articulated in many different ways. The Casa del Fascio is an architectural organism which undergoes through a continuous transformation of the theme of the grid, of patterns. And these patterns in each elevation produce variation on the theme. And therefore the facade, the four facades are all different one from the other. And their articulation is a constant alternation of in and out planes, push and pull, detail that reveal recess or produce protruding volumes. So again, also here, I mean, I think that this idea, not that the wall is a mass, it's a layering, has a layering quality, it's sculpted out. On top of this sculpted out, let's say like this, gridded variation of the Roman grid of Como, of the Roman grid of the city of Como, there is this beautiful loggia, which is the place from where Mussolini could stand up and hooray, I think it's the word that we use, harangue the crowd. You know what I mean. The interior courtyard, and I'm sorry for this blurring slide here. The interior space and the lobby, it's really a remembrance of the Palazzo courtyard. It's not open to the sky, so it's not really a Palazzo courtyard. He shows an incredible 3D spatial aesthetic, which is grounded in a disposed reinforced concrete structural frame. It's beautiful and complex rhythmic layers of walls, opening frames in which transparent glass blocks, polished stones, filter light, as well as direct views to a movement towards the upper floor and the city outside. This is, when we're looking at this, we can understand, and this image, this one over here, we can really understand the fascination that many American architects in the 60s, above all Peter Eisman, had towards the work of Terragni. Now, this possibility of creating an aesthetic of a frame, of a grid that can be multiplied, defined, and change and transform, but still being recognizable in many, many different ways. And he does it here also with the extensive use of different kind of materials. There are lots of marble here. There is a red Trani stone, an Adriatic yellow, and black Belgian stones marble. So it's not simply the white of the travertine of the outside of the white of the stucco on top of the gridded structural frame, but it's also all these other colors, which are really, really important. The meeting room, and I'm sorry, also here we have these images, it's really blurred, unfortunately, this one, the historical one. This was the meeting room, and you can see the meeting room, where the directorial would meet. You see that we have glass on one side, glass on the other side, and the aesthetic is absolutely the aesthetic of the modernist movement. Terragni says about the Casa del Fascio, and I quote, "The Casa del Fascio is not the place for long waiting in large commodious waiting rooms. Bureaucracy has no reason for being here. The party members who come to confer with the party leaders cannot conceive of private or secret exits. The meeting of the various directors cannot assume the characteristic of close conclaves." So everybody together, everybody at the same level, and total transparency. Another very important building that he designed, it's only a project in reality, that he did for the Italian fascist architecture, was the national headquarters of the fascist party in Rome. The project was one of the entry of a national competition that was held in 1934, and the site is across the Roman Forum and the Basilica of Ascension along the Forum Imperiale. And you see here at the end, the Colosseum and the Basilica of Ascension over here. The Terragni proposal is of an absolute forms. It's about absolute forms, abstract perfection, pure rhythm. He creates a talking ruins, if I can say, among the real ruins of the content. And you see it here. That's the archaeological excavation of the Roman Forum. It is an assemblage of traces that contain the classic and the modern world. The complex configuration of the building is hidden behind a monumental curved wall of red porphyry panels, a material largely used during Imperial Rome. And this wall stands in direct relationship with the Basilica of Ascension. We can appreciate its mass and its volumetric essence and purity. The wall is broken in two, and from the dark shadow recess of the cut, a balcony juts out, occupying the space of the public realm. From here, Mussolini would talk to his citizens and would be admired by them. In Terragni's world, the visual perspective, the immense wall as a backdrop, would make him look like God against the sky. And I want to quote something that Giorgio Ciucci, a very important architectural historian in Italy, says about Terragni's work. Terragni's architecture assumes an already given order. It does not invoke it, but evokes it. There is no need to invent an ideological content, but only to transmit the new order imposed by fascism. Its buildings tell of an immutable order, aspire to possess a classical harmony, confront the everyday, and enhance its eternal values. Which I would like to risk to saying that this is what Terragni believes Italian architecture should do and should be. So the Italian identity for Terragni is expressed exactly in this. And to finish, I'll show you the last project, which is, again, only a speculative project, a theoretical exercise on forms and symbols. The building intended to celebrate our most important poet, Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri lived during the 13th century and is considered the father of Italian language, an intellectual that with his body of work, in particular the Divine Comedy, was able to summarize the character of our culture, our strength, and our weakness. So the building proper on its own is a celebration of Italianità and identity. The project was never built due to the outbreak of World War II. The drawings fortunately survived from the bombings, and they were partially published in 1957. And the beautiful watercolors were instead published only in 1976. The tantam is conceived and designed in formal relation and dimensional relationship with the pre-existing structure of the site, as well as in close formal relationship with the Divine Comedy and its literary structure. Terragni did actually follow the book Architectural Construction to design his own architectural narrative and its spatial expression. When we enter the building, first of all, the building is separated from the street from this huge wall. And this wall is a wall of composed by 100 stones of marble, blocks of marbles, which are the same one of the chapters of the Divine Comedy. We have to enter here to then find a very teeny tiny entrance to be squeezed in between these two walls and enter into the first courtyard. So there is a kind of further separation from everyday life to move inside and find a secret space. And even the entrance is quite hidden. The Divine Comedy talks about a journey that Dante does in the middle of his life when he's 33 years old. And he decided to go, guided by Virgil, another Italian poet, classical poet, to enter and do a trip through a journey through the hell, inferno, purgatory, and paradise. So it is somehow a research of consciousness, of knowledge, of discovery, of his own discovery about who he is, and a discovery of what we are as a country, as an Italian culture, as identity. So the building itself translates the structure of the Divina Comedy and the journey that Dante does inside the Divina Comedy into architecture. So the first step is the courtyard in which Dante, which represent the life of Dante before entering this journey of consciousness. And it's empty because practically there is nothing significant about that life done on an unconscious state before actually entering into the big trip or journey. Dante moves inside a darkened foresta oscura, a darkened wood. And as Dante, we find ourselves inside this forest of columns. Then we move inside, and finally we enter into the first room, which represents the inferno, hell. The hell is, as you can see it, is divided in 7 squares, and 7 is another number of the Divine Comedy. The 7 squares are in relation to each other in a spiral motif, and they are actually a golden section, a work on golden section. Then from here we would move up through 9 steps, which is another 3 by 3, it's another number of the Divine Comedy, and entering into the main space of the purgatory. From the purgatory going out, and reach the paradise. And the paradise, it becomes this kind of very ethereal, ephemeral place where we found 33 glass columns that support a transparent frame open to the sky. It is a transformative experience, which is accentuated by the sophisticated articulation of the section. And look at the section and the complexity of the spatial condition. The section, I think, are really, really beautiful. There is a way of creating really phenomenological, experiential atmosphere. I mean, we are moving through different kinds of volumes. Narrow, tall, open to the sky, full of light, completely dark. All this system, which is super poetic and super articulated, what's based on, here we see it, actually here is the building, the downtown, the site of the downtown, and this is the Basilica of Massencio. So it's a very close, located to the same side of the Littoriano building. So this building, his downtown, is based on relationship with the other fragments, the fragments which are on the site. Again, logical proportion, logical system, mathematical order, regulating line, golden section, all of that. It's used to check, control that his own piece of architecture is related to what we find in classical architecture, in particular the Basilica of Mastemcio. So it's a desire really to produce something which is modern but classic. Let's look at these watercolors and the model. You can see it from here, the model, the complexity of the model. The main entrance that was not parallel along Via dei Fori Imperiali. We enter here, then we move, we find the atrium over here, and then we move inside the Inferno, and then inside the Purgatory. And the Inferno, it's quite interesting because the room closes on us practically. The 7 squares are articulating different position of the floor, and the ceiling as well is dropping down. So while we're moving to the space, we'll end up into something which is super dense, full of columns. Then our movements force us to enter into this super dense space, and then from here moving behind into the Purgatory, which finally is a space which is released. We still walk on these other 7 platforms, but the sky is open. We can start to breathe. We can start to see somehow the possibility of moving forward. It's extremely spiritual space. And then finally, we will reach the paradise. And I added here also this computer graphic that was done lately. I think that the drawing by Terragni is way too much more evocative than this computer graphic drawing, but just to let you see that really somehow there is a desire to destroy, to dematerialize the experience, to not change it completely, the experience from solid, heavy, masses, dark, to this kind of, yes, completely open to the sky, transparent. Dematerialize is the right word. We have been moving through the downtown along a spiral, which is the same entire spiral experience, which is now all in each single room and then from the entire building. And this spiraling up is organized to lead us towards infinity, to the absence of a place, and to the disintegration of materials and forms at the end. The building is completely introverted. There is no need for the contest. And at the end of the journey, there is no need for a physical space. Terragni's rationalism at the end is true classicism, based on purity, on absolute, on proportion, on mathematics, and it embodies the Greek-Roman spirit. I think that the Gruppo 7 and the rationalists during fascism believed that this is the Italian spirit and what we really call, it could call Italianità. Terragni certainly believed that and tried to reach that national identity through classicism in a certain sense. Classicism, so connecting a classical traditional and translating that, transforming that into a modern contemporary language. I would like to conclude here with using Terragni's word, because I think this is for me, when I read this, I think that this is the point of why we should do architecture, and it's what architecture should be. Architecture is neither construction or satisfaction of the material needs. It is something more. It is the strength that forces construction qualities and functional issues into a higher aesthetic values. When we will reach the level of proportioned harmony that will induce to contemplation or will move the observer, then and only then to the construction scheme will overlap a piece of architecture. Thank you. Okay. Here I am.
Beatrice, thank you so much. That was great. I'll go ahead and start with a few questions, and then we'll see if we can get some other people to contribute as well. Kind of going backwards, the project you were just speaking of,
do you want me to continue to share the screen?
The Danteum, maybe if perhaps if it's relevant to my question.
Okay.
You had mentioned the 100 columns kind of represented the 100 chapters of the Paradise. The 30, was it 33 glass columns in Paradise? Yes. What do they represent, the 33 columns?
Okay, the structure of the Divine Comedy is divided in I don't have the word in English. Okay, let's call it chapter. Okay, the big wall, which is separating the Tanteum from Via dei Fori Imperiali, that huge wall was done by the 100 chapters of the Divina Comedy. Then when we enter inside the Divina Comedy, we have 3 places: Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. In each of these 3 places, for each of these 3 places, he writes 33 chapters, sub-chapters. And each of these 33 each chapter is written in with a poetic system in which the poem is written in lines of 3. And I don't have the English word, terzine, it's in Italian. So the number 3 is a subdivision of everything else.
Okay.
So the 33 columns of the Paradise are the 33 columns representing the chapter of the Paradise.
Okay.
And each sub-chapter of the Divine Comedy is dedicated to an Italian figure, which represents a sin, a bad aspect, a weakness, a strength of us, a part of our culture.
Interesting. You know, and I like the way that you tied Italian identity to Dante. But one of the things I found interesting is when you were talking about, we had just kind of began to enter into the 20th century here in our class, and we just began to grasp or introduce the concept of nationalism, and what a recent concept it really is in terms of history. And you had mentioned that this nationalism and its connection to fascism, that a lot of times we only see the end of fascism relative to its impact on Italy and on the world. But what I would be curious about is if you could talk a little bit about that concept of nationalism, because you began your talk with that unification of Italy didn't really even come until the end of the 19th century, and really kind of foment at the beginning of the 20th. And it was at the result of violence. I mean, in essence, a civil war. When did nationalism as an Italian state really begin to come along? Is it with fascism?
I think it comes along with fascism, which is another violent act. So nationalism has always been a violent thing. I'm not sure. Also, the other things that I would like to say, I think that nationalism, especially in Italy with fascism, it's a spirit, a sentiment, a feeling that belongs to the leading classes. I don't think at all that the people that were the poor, the workers, and so on, felt any kind of attitude towards identity. They don't even question that. There was not a point. In fact, actually, when we really started to consider the making of Italy as a country with solid value for everybody, it was after the Second World. At that point, I mean, after the Second World, there were the dialects and the language that we were talking were so diverse that if I would have go to the South, I would have not be able to understand what these people were talking about. So there was a huge, let's say, educational push that was implemented very strongly with the TV in the 50s, when the TV arrived, through the TV. I think that it's really through the TV and the various programs that slowly does this national sense, this national identity start to appear. Before that, we were really very much divided. So it was more a political issue, a question of propaganda, a question of power to talk about nationalism, a question of pride. I mean, Mussolini and the fascists, they were competing with the rest of Europe, and they were thinking that we were extremely poor. No, it's like we couldn't compare with Germany, with France, with England. No, in fact, I mean, when Antonelli, he does his own, I didn't explain well that. When Antonelli does the Mole Antonelliana in Turin and he uses brick instead of iron, he have to use brick instead of iron because iron was extremely expensive for us. So we were super behind in terms of industrialization and super behind, therefore, to economically, culturally, socially, compare with the rest of the European country. So the only thing that fascists can do really to compete is to create this kind of myth of identity. So we are Italy, like the rest of the people, the rest of the country. We are big as them, but we weren't. And I really don't know, I don't think that this desire of national identity, which belonged to the leading classes, was really felt from middle class, lower class, and so on. I don't think so. But
yeah, and I think we see this myth building in the Germanic countries. We see this myth building in Russia, kind of at the same time. You know, Britain had kind of created its own myth around the Victorian period. So, you know, that concept of mything your way to an identity is common and not necessarily you know, specific to Mussolini's movement. I wonder, I mean, who only knows what would have happened to Italian identity if there wouldn't have been a World War II? Yeah. You know, if that level of just complete destruction and resetting everything, like you'd mentioned, the TV age of the 50s, you know, is that kind of connector. And I wonder if there would have been that desire to even make that connection if it wouldn't have been because of the devastation of World War II. I'm also curious about Tirani. I mean, I know that you know, architecturally amazing, particularly the concept of layering diaphragms, understanding layering in almost in a cross-reference way, in a three-dimensional stacking, a matrix, if you would, is really the way that he thought was really quite unique for the time. I'm curious, though, just on an aesthetic level, in one of your images, you showed that conference room that looked like a black and white image, maybe from just post-war era or pre-war era. And then the next image showed those lovely chairs. Do we know where those came from? Where that design, was that one of Tirani's or?
I don't know. I can try to find out. I don't know. They look like very Bauhaus.
They do. They look very German to me.
It could be.
But I'm just curious. But, you know, I mean, you know, we can look to Olivetti and some of those people as far as that kind of design aesthetic that really defined the post-war era. Beatrice, let me throw it out to anybody else in our audience here. Does anybody else have a question for Beatrice?
Going off of that, your Tirani question, you also mentioned that he based his designs on a mathematical system similar to like the Renaissance. Are there any like specific ratios or angles that are significant? Like it seems like 90-degree angles are used a ton with this modern design.
Well, it seems, yes, he's using always 90 degrees angles. He has the golden section that's you can find it in many different parts, and it is I would say a repetitive system. I mean, we've seen here only 3 projects, but in general, in all the other projects, he really worked the institutional project, because in the houses it's a little bit different. But in the institutional project, he likes to work a lot with modular system and gridded system and subsystem, sub-unit. So breaking A, and then half A, two-thirds of an A, and so on. I don't know if I answered that, but
yeah, I may be speaking out of turn, Logan, but I believe he was a really big into using the geometric bisecting activities. So he may have began with perhaps a golden mean of a rectangle, but then his grading system beyond that is a series of just a very really kind of complicated using geometric separation, which by its very nature kind of has an element of a ratio or a golden mean, because you begin with that ratio, and it's kind of tied to the ancient Greeks, and again that kind of rediscovery in the Renaissance.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Anybody else have a question for Beatrice?
Yeah, I had a question. I don't think I caught the name of the actual building, but we were talking about Dante for a while, and the building with the Inferno and Purgatory and Paradise. That's the one that you said was never constructed, right? Because of World War II?
No, it was never constructed, period. I mean,
okay.
it also disappeared. We didn't know it. I mean, his project was missed. I don't know exactly what happened. I mean, it was found again only in 57.
So so what we were just learning from, that was just all like written text and stuff that had been found after the fact?
We're seeing the drawings.
Yeah.
I don't understand your question.
How was it discovered, Beatrice?
How it was discovered, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
But somebody found these drawings.
Some archives, some historians was looking for it, and they found it in archives. But I'm not sure. I
wonder if there was ever a showing or a presentation or a competition of some kind that, I wonder what initial thread led somebody down the path to find it.
Okay, the project was given to him directly.
Mm.
So it was known that Terragni did this project. But the project, yes, I'm sorry, I thought I'd said it, but no, it was known. I mean, it was that kind of direct, how you say it? There is the client that say, you do it for me. Direct commission. It was a direct commission. And, but then the project was not built and ended up into an archive, which I don't know where, honestly. And then it was refound by some historians in the in the middle of the 50s.
And of course,
thank you.
Go ahead, George.
I was just going to say thank you. That was exactly what I was asking for.
Okay.
How curious that it was a direct commission and kind of based on Renaissance compositional organizational concepts, much like the Medici would have given a commission to Alberti or somebody else in the Renaissance. It's almost kind of a interesting cycle. Anybody else have a question for Beatrice? Was it 9 o'clock in the evening there, Beatrice? 8. So you're definitely past your working time. I would like to thank you very much for presenting this to us today. I know that the class enjoyed it. We had quite a group at one point. I think we had almost 100 people in your lecture at one point. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to doing this again next year. I also want to remind everyone here that Beatrice is an absolutely essential part of our Rome program, and is somebody that you would get to interact with directly should you get the opportunity to go next spring on our Rome 22 program. So I would encourage you guys to look into that if you have that possibility, because to get firsthand teaching experience with Beatrice would be an asset for all of you, or any of you that would get that opportunity. So Beatrice, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. And I want to say, if you're coming to Rome, I will show you lots of fascist architecture. Not Terrani, because Terrani is in Milan, but we can try to go to Como to see the Casa del Fascio together. Otherwise, we will see other beautiful architecture in Rome.
In fact, you can take them, what is it, at the Vittorio Emanuele,
Yes, we can go there.
you can take them up the glass elevator. If any of you that are afraid of heights and you really want to, in a great adventure, there's this glass elevator that takes you up the back of that building so that you can wander around on the rooftop. And as somebody who's not all that fond of heights,
okay. Well, thank you very much, very much. It's always nice to be able to talk about the work of Terrani, but to participate and talk with students, and we all share this passion towards architecture, I hope. So it's nice to share it together in moments like this.
Thank you so much. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.